We're going to shift gears a little bit here and talk about something that usually isn't talked about until long after services have been provided, and that's something called management. And the other thing I'll say is, having spent too many years in the telco business and then followed by that in the IT industry, management is something that is rarely discussed and rarely thought about in a standards perspective. But anyway, a few years ago I was talking with Steve and he said, well, why don't you think about it from a cloud perspective? And suddenly it dawned on us that we've got some big problems. And what I've got up here is a bit of a comparison, if you will, between traditional management in a traditional IT or telecommunications environment versus a cloud. If you think about a traditional management environment where I started too many years ago in Bell Labs, we had large management systems. And by the way, when I say large, I'm talking some that contain 40 or 50 million lines of code. And trust me, that was developed over something like 15 or 20 years. Some of them are still in existence. And when I started on them, they were 10 years old then, so they're 40, 45 years old. If you think that's managing a dynamic environment, I have another story for you. And if you think that anybody knows what's going on in those things, I have another story for you. It's not true. The key here is, though, that those were developed for a single, all those management systems are developed and deployed by a single party to manage the provider's services. If you think about management in a federation, you now have multiple parties that are interested in a common goal. They may not even have common goals. They may have individual common goals between them. So it's a very complex management model. The second part is management systems traditionally have been a very, very static thing. When you've got 30 million lines of code, by definition, it's static. And when you've got 30 million lines of code that include anything from 3 or 4 different assembly languages, COBOL, Fortran, PL1, Pascal, C, C++, and I'm not kidding you, this is one operation support system. That is not a dynamic system. The problem is, in a cloud computing, your federations can come and go. You can be federated for one service and go away. You're not going to be doing that with a very static system. It's got to be a very dynamic system that understands what's happening, what's going on, and how to manage that at that particular point in time, and then get rid of it if necessary. Second thing, another point we've got here is, in a federation, who's the single source of management? Well, in the telco world, that was easy. The ITU said, oh, we're defining something, you manage this part, you manage that part, and it's all defined. Cloud, we haven't done that. And I don't think it is going to be done, because there's a lot of very interested parties. So now we're going to have to think about, how does each entity manage their end of the federation to meet their goals? Each one may have different goals. And finally, and this is a big one that I spend too much time on, is if you look at management systems in the past and the current ones, they're very reactive. I've used the analogy that they're kind of like the fire department in the little town in Vermont that I grew up in. They were known as cellar hole savers. Somebody called in and said there's a fire. The fire department wasn't there to save that building. The fire department was there to make sure it didn't spread to any other buildings, and basically they saved the cellar hole for the building on fire. That's how we manage systems. You get an alarm, something has happened, something terrible is happening, and you go out and try to prevent as much as possible that fire from spreading throughout the rest of the system. That is not going to work in a highly dynamic environment. We've got to be able to figure out how to manage from a proactive perspective and be able to prevent the fires from happening. Think about it this way. It's a heck of a lot easier to go into a building with fire alarms, with a watering system and all that, and prevent a catastrophic fire than it is to go into one that has none of that. In fact, if you're a fireman, you don't want to go into a building where there's a major fire. Oh, so what's the vision for this new group in the IEEE P2303 that I'm leading? One of the things that we're going to try to do is to, if you look at a traditional management system, and almost all of them have some flavor of monitoring, i.e. you're monitoring what's going on, analytics, decide, given some stimuli, what happened, and some decision making. That's no surprise. That's a pretty common model for policies or anything like that. The problem is that traditional management systems, those things were hard-coded and they didn't change. So you had a fault, you go in, you correct the fault, you may change the configuration of the system, you may change the resources, you may change the goals. Do you change the management system? Nope. So what are you doing? 5 years down the road, you're managing an environment that has nothing to do with what you built your management system for. That's not a good answer. So what we've got to do is sit down and think about how we can change these things so that monitoring, analytics, and decision making are customized dynamically for the current context and for the current stakeholders, because they can change dynamically too. Now, if you do that, and I will go into, not very deep into feedback theory, being, you know, that goes back too far in my brain in my electrical engineering degree. If you don't put feedback and feed-forward loops into a dynamic system like that, you're talking in deep trouble. So you've got to be able to not only learn what you've done and what the guy in front of you has done, but you've got to tell the guy behind you what you're thinking about at that point in time, so that each one in the loop can understand how the system is dynamically changing. Now, one of the things that we have already looked at is this kind of continuum of management. Remember I said all the old systems were reactive? Well, we're looking now at a new model, and I showed this to Steve, I guess about a year ago, and he kind of gave me one of Steve's smiles and said, gee, I think you're onto something. We can't manage just things that have happened. I would save the cellar hole. But what about things that are currently happening? We want to be able to, as the fire starts, let's get the fire out. All right, you've got a grease fire on the stove. Let's not wait until it's caught the whole kitchen on fire. Let's put the lid on the fire so that we can keep it from expanding. That's good. But I think there's two more that really impact types of management, that really impact the cloud computing and really can make cloud computing management different from the past. And those are the latter two. Preactive management, that is, given that I know something is going to happen, I'm going to add new capabilities. I'm going to change my business goals. I can change the management systems, change my decisions, and change my analytics adapt those before the new elements are introduced to the system. And so we can sit down and change the system to have what we have in the future. The last one's a bit trickier. And that's proactive, and that's saying, oh, I'm going to predict what's going to happen in the future, and I'm going to try to manage for that. That's a very, very difficult one. I'm not going to claim that we're going to come up with a blinding flash of brilliance. But I think in the long run, if we want cloud computing to be truly dynamic and to really realize its potential, we're going to have to get to a style of management that is proactive. So, with that, I will say one thing, and that is we're just starting. If you're interested in management in any way, shape, or form, particularly in advancing this from the perspective of clouds, just stop by, see me, and I can lead you on down the path of a totally different style of management.
Panasonic.